Okay, so if you haven't already, you should have your groupings kind of partnered up. So each of the stack of 5-inch squares that we had created, we need to partner up 2 rectangles with each of those. So go ahead and do that. That's kind of the fun part. You get to decide what you want where and the scale and kind of value of each of the fabrics, and play around with what you think looks best and kind of what is most appealing to you. I promise you there's not really a right or wrong for this quilt, okay? Because that's why I choose the patterns I choose for beginners classes, is I want it to, kind of all work out in the end, as far as not having to worry too much about placement of fabrics and colors and whatnot, just because I want you to be able to relax and learn the basics before you start adding in too much more difficulty. But have fun with it, as long as you're keeping it fun, decide what you want to partner up and go ahead and get your groupings ready. Once you have that done, what we're ready to do next is start sewing, which is again the fun part. So you should have your machine set up. You can either do the quilter's foot or the standard foot, but hopefully at this point you have your 1/4 inch seam worked out and you're ready to start your sewing. And so what you want to do first is you're going to take one of your groupings and you want to separate out one of the rectangles. Go ahead and partner that up with with the square. So remember, whenever you're using those directional prints, don't forget that you do need to take that into account even when you're pinning and when you're sewing. So for instance, the bow print here, I want to make sure my bows are going in the right direction on my quilt. So I'm going to position my square in this way, and that means that one of my rectangles will match along the top of this, and the other will be placed here on the bottom. Now it's up to you, okay? If you want to go ahead and pin both of these, I am going to share a video with you on how to chain piece, in which case you would just do one of the rectangles, but you would do all 24 of your blocks. You would just focus on attaching the one rectangle throughout your entire stack of 5-inch blocks. But if you want to go ahead and pin both of these, that's totally fine. And that way you know that you're keeping the partners together that you had planned. So just in some way keep that organized. If it's sequencing, groups, like do 10 at a time, and that way you can keep your partners in line. However you want to do that, but we want to go ahead and prepare these for sewing. So I'm going to bring my sample over here and show you how we want that set up. So I've got my 5-inch square, pretty side up. I have my rectangle, wrong side up. The pretty side, the right side of the fabric, is facing the Santa print, or it's facing the 5-inch square. So you kind of see how that's going to work out together there. And that's so that once we sew this seam, this is going to flip out. And when this flips, we're going to have our pretty sides facing up, and we'll have this nice pretty seam here where the two are joined. So that's why you're always going to do right sides together when you're piecing. And notice I used 2 pins to hold my pieces together, and we want to focus on aligning our edges here, making sure that those are even. You don't want one layer a little lower or a little higher than the other. So now we're ready to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to go ahead and sew our 1/4 inch seam here. Okay, so now I'm ready to start sewing. I have my 1/4 inch seam allowance marked with my tape. I'm using the standard foot. I just wanted to show that as an example for my beginners in case that one works better for you. I have my needle set at 5.5. That's my needle position, which is typically the width setting on your sewing machine will control your needle position. So 5.5, you can reduce your stitch length down to a 2 if you'd like, just for a tighter, more secure seam. What we're gonna do is go ahead and butt up our fabric to our guide, then we'll slide under to the needle. Once you're under the needle, you'll lower your presser foot. You can go ahead and lower the needle and then begin sewing. I would take your pins out as you sew. That's, up to you what you want to do there, but if the needle does hit the pin, it could break your sewing machine needle. It also will kind of throw off your 1/4 inch measurement as well. It kind of twists the fabric a little bit. So I think it's best to just stop and pull those out, but totally up to you. You're going to sew all the way to the end, and then you can do one of 2 things. You could stop and remove your fabric at this point, or you could take your next grouping, which bear with me 1 second as I prepare one, but you could take your next grouping and do what's called chain piecing. And that's just going to be pulling in another piece. So I'm going to bring this guy over, butt it up to the tape. I'm going to have my needle down, which it is. I'm going to lift my presser foot and send it under the presser foot, not overlapping the previous piece, but just touching. And then you just continue to sew onto that guy. Your machine starts to pull that one through, and take your pins out as you go, of course. And that's pretty much it. And then you would just continue doing this little chain piece technique all the way through all 24, 60, or 112 squares or groupings that you have to do. So it's a lot of fun. You'll kind of get in a rhythm. You'll really be able to knock a lot of those out much quicker than you think. But I would go ahead and attach all of the rectangles to the top using that chain piece technique, and then go back and do the rectangles on the bottom of each of the 5-inch squares. And again, using that chain piecing technique. Okay, so when we're done, we have this little, look here where it's like a chain. You're gonna just take your clippers there, and we will detach these from each other. And it's that simple. And then we have both of these. We'll take to our iron. We'll remember that we're gonna press our seams open, make sure it's nice and smooth, press those open, and then we'll be ready to attach the rectangle to our other side. So that kind of gets you started with your homework. Let me know if you have any questions.